thank you. Welcome, everyone. So here's my presentation. Imagine waking up one day, finding out that your entire digital identity has been stolen. It's not a plot from some movie. It actually happened to a close friend of mine. It completely changed the way I view cybersecurity forever. More on that friend later in the presentation. My name is Luca Zingaro. I'm a cybersecurity professional with several years of experience in protecting businesses and individuals from digital threats. I've had the privilege of working with some of the leading firms, and I aspire to never stop learning about the field. So today I'll be telling you guys and hopefully teaching you a little bit about your digital footprint. All right, so what is a digital footprint? So a digital footprint has a few things that are important. So the first thing is personal information. Everyone has personal information about themselves on the internet. And that could be things that you put to sign up for a website, your birthday, your name. There's also behavioral data. That's what you click on. What do you do when you're using the internet? And transactional data. What do you buy? How much do you spend? What are you spending that on? And then as well, social data. Who are you friends with? Who do you know? Who do you interact with the most? And for example, Facebook collects an average of 52,000 data points on every user. So those few points can tell a lot about someone. All right, so corporations and your data. There's a bit of an important role that corporations play in data and data privacy as well. Exploitation is a big thing where corporations don't disclose fully what they do with your data. Currently, it's very easy for corporations to do this, and a lot of the times you end up not knowing where your data is being used. Another thing is targeted advertising. We'll get more into that in a bit, and psychological manipulation. So data brokers collect and sell millions of information from millions of individuals, often without their knowledge. And so that goes back to the first point of exploitation. Not knowing where your data is being used is pretty important. Next, the global digital advertising market is valued at over $400 billion. And that's driven largely by data-driven targeting. So the advertising market is sometimes bigger than the products that they're selling, meaning that your data is more valuable than what you're buying. Sometimes you may get a good deal on something, but depending on where you're getting it from, it could be because they're taking something else. A lot of people are familiar with Cambridge Analytica. It was a Netflix documentary as well. And Cambridge Analytica, a company that used personal information from Facebook to use psychological manipulation in the 2016 US elections. And if you haven't watched that, it's a great documentary on Netflix, so I suggest it. Now, there is a dark side of personal data on the internet, and we'll get more into this, and we'll cover a few points like data breaches on the dark web, and where does your data go? Identity theft and fraud. Again, going back to my friend, we'll read more about her in a bit. And the psychological impact and long-term consequences that these things can have on people. So the first point is data breaches. Data breaches are when your data is found outside of where it should be. That could be the dark web, or when someone attacks a company or website to steal information. For example, the number of data breaches in the US has increased by 70% in the past 5 years. It's a growing problem because data is more important and more expensive than ever. Over 4 billion records have been exposed in data breaches globally in the first half of 2019 alone. So in 6 months, 4 billion records have been breached, meaning they have been sent to people who shouldn't have your information. And I'm probably sure at least a couple of us here have their data online where it shouldn't be, either in the dark web or in someone else's hands. And nearly 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of a significant data breach. So if you're a small business that uses customer data or anything like payment methods or credit information, you're at very high risk of going out of business because of these threats. So meet Natalie, a friend of mine actually. Natalie was exposed in a massive data breach. She opened a bank account with a bank here in Canada. And after a big data breach, her account was actually drained. And as well, she had bills for credit cards that she never opened come to her house without her knowledge. All of this took place without her knowledge. She didn't know what was going on until she received those bills, which ended up causing her a lot of financial strain. It's a lot of work to get that resolved and to prove that it was a data breach. It did come out a few years later that there was a major data breach for this bank, but that's way too long of a time. Her credit score plummeted, and in the US and Canada, credit score is very important. We use that to get a loan for a car, buy a house. Basically, without a credit score over here, your life is pretty much over. And she was looking for a home during this time, so it was very hard for her to get approved for a home. And she missed out on a home that she really wanted. It took over a year for it to get resolved. And even to this day, she has to get credit monitoring and services anytime she wants to open a credit card or a new bank account. Now, keep that in mind. And also this next piece of information is that in 2021, there are over 24 million Natalies in the US alone. Meaning 24 million people went through the same struggles that Natalie did and continue to every year. Natalie is actually not a close friend of mine. Natalie is my mom. This happened to my mom a few years ago. So yeah, and like I mentioned in the beginning, it really changed my view of cybersecurity, and it's one of the reasons why I'm bringing this to you guys today. Now, what can you do? It's important to know that there are a few things that you can do, but we'll get to it that there isn't everything that you can do. There's a lot of things that aren't in your control, for example. So cybersecurity best practices on a personal level. Protecting what you can control is important. Everyone who works in a corporation that's very security focused knows about the cybersecurity best practices. So long passwords, using multi-factor authentication. But there's other things that you can be doing to protect your identity and digital footprint as well. One of those is credit monitoring. Signing up for credit monitoring services is important. Any red flags that are caught, you'll be caught before something bad happens. Scamming and phishing awareness is a big one, keeping up to date with the newest scams and also any phishing attacks that are going around. And then limit personal information that you share. It's very important to not overshare online. And you see it a lot nowadays that people are oversharing information. But as I mentioned, it isn't all in your control. There is a lot of anti-consumer foul play and a lack of policies and legislation against data privacy. So to advocate for privacy and data regulation, it's important to start by choosing privacy-conscious companies. Not everyone likes Apple, but when it comes to data privacy, I do have to commend them. They are better than most companies, for example, maybe Google. Companies with strong privacy policies are also important. Those companies are setting the tone that other companies should follow. And they're also very less likely to suffer data breach. When companies don't hold your data, there's no incentive for bad actors to go and take your data. Two is not just corporations, governments too. I've been focusing a lot on corporations, but a big part of data privacy and the problem that we have with it is our governments don't do enough to protect our data. Mass surveillance programs. We see as China, for an example, and we'll get more into that in a bit, but it's happening even in the US, Europe, Canada. facial recognition technology. Recently, I was on a flight to Oregon in the US, and before I got onto the plane, there's this brand new big machine with some signs telling you facial recognition technology. Little do you know, you can actually opt out, but that might be a bit weird to tell the flight attendant that you don't want your picture taken. But that's there because they're testing these facial recognition technologies. And there's not really much we can do against it, especially when it comes from a government agency. They often collect data without transparency or accountability. So knowing your rights is the first step. So in Europe, there's laws like the GDPR and CCPA in California. And these are a good start, but they're not enough to help you protect your data. It gives you control, allows you to request that your data is not being used by companies and also governments. Although the request can take a long time, and so there's a lot of work that has to be done. So a few examples. So the Patriot Act expanded the US government's surveillance capabilities, allowing for collection of phone records and internet records. So the Patriot Act, which was kind of shown by Edward Snowden in 2013, he released that the NSA was, in fact, spying on US citizens and Canadian citizens through their quote-unquote patriotic act. It's also kind of a play on words. You can't be against the Patriotic Act because that makes you a traitor. It's one of the reasons that they probably named it that. But Edward Snowden found out that the US government was collecting phone data without their knowledge. He is considered a traitor now. And then back to China, the government, as we all know, does use a lot of facial recognition technology, but also people's data to make people have harder lives. So if you're, quote unquote, not desirable to the Chinese government, you may not even be allowed to leave your city. You might not be able to buy a car, rent a car, take a train, take a plane. So these are things where they're limiting your mobilization based off of your data that they collect off. So knowing these things, it's important to keep in mind how important your data is, because it tells a lot about you, even more than you might know. All right, well, that is my presentation.